Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch by interviewing authors, discussing their books, learning about the writing process, and even, on occasion, chatting live with a panel of authors to discuss topics relevant to both readers and writers. My guest today on the Online for Authors podcast is Carla Damron, author of the book Justice Be Done. Carla is a South Carolina native. Born in Sumter, she currently lives outside of Columbia with her husband Jim Hussey and their blended family of assorted animals. In my book review, I stated Justice Be Done is a contemporary suspense novel set in Columbia, South Carolina. The main character, Caleb Knowles, is a social worker who often consults with criminals and suspects for the police department. This time, the criminal is a teenager, and the crime stems from racial mistreatment. The more Caleb looks, the more he finds. Discrimination in the community, discrimination in the police force, discrimination among the political leaders. Finally, the discrimination touches his own family. Will he be able to save his client? Can he save others? Or will hatred and violence ultimately win? This is a can't put down read. Today on the Online for Authors podcast, I'm chatting with Carla Damron, author of Justice Be Done. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you, Terry. It's great to be here.
It is wonderful to have you. Before we get into the book, I want you to just give a quick little elevator pitch. What are readers going to find when they open up the cover?
So my protagonist is a recurring protagonist, Caleb Knowles, and he goes to a jail to interview a 16-year-old African-American kid who has been arrested for assaulting a white store owner. He quickly learns that there's more to the crime than meets the eye. And that crime becomes the match that lights a flame. There's a retaliation by a group of white vigilantes, and then things escalate into protests and riots. And against the backdrop of all that bedlam, a white police officer is murdered, and it's about his murder and how it's solved.
Fantastic. So this is, as you said, a series. So it's part of the Caleb Knowles mystery series.
Yes.
And I'm curious if you believe this is a standalone. Could someone just come in the middle and start there? And then I want to know what prompted you to write a series.
So it's absolutely could be a standalone. I think, people that have followed the series like to see how the characters evolve in terms of a long arc, but you could pick this up and be fine.
So, and just to say that how true that is, I did not realize that I was getting book 4 of a series. Mm-hmm. So I read it with no notion, and I never had any feeling that I missed anything. And then later it was like, oh, I can go back and read more. So yeah. So although it's fun to read a series 1 through whatever, it's in this one in particular, it seems to be okay to pick up wherever you pick up.
Yeah, and I think that's important because you never know where readers are going to find your book and stuff like that. So I think that's really important. Why I wanted to write a series, this was my very first novel that I tried to write was Keeping Silent, the first in that series. And in my family, we love mysteries.
Okay.
We love mysteries. And I've always loved mystery series because if I like a character, I want to stay with them. Right. It's like I'm a big fan of Louise Penny. I can't wait for the next Inspector Gamache. I just want to know what's going to happen next. So I get attached. And so that's what I wanted to do with this series as well.
That's fantastic. People have asked me if I would ever consider a series, and I don't think they would be good for me. I get bored. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't mind reading a series, but when it comes to writing, it's like, nope, I wrap that character up. I'm ready to go on to something else. I have lots of characters running around in there. And it's like, I don't know that I'd want to stick to one thing, but you did a wonderful job with this. I noticed that your books in general, I went back and looked over what else you've written. You write about social issues. We see grief, we see addiction, we see human trafficking, we see racial tension. What prompts you to use that kind of as your basis for writing?
Yeah, it's kind of become my brand. And I would say the reason is I can't not write about social issues. In my other life, I'm a social worker.
I like that. In my other life, right?
Yeah. Which is really not true because I'm a social worker as a writer as well. I feel like my social work practice comes out in my writing. And so and writing for me is very therapeutic. So I write about things that disturb me, or I need to question, or I need to explore in more depth. And those tend to be social issues.
Right.
So like Justice Be Done, the genesis for that came from in 2020, after the George Floyd murders. We had riots here in Columbia, South Carolina, and I'm watching them on the news and going, how is this happening in my town?
Right.
And then I was like, why is it happening? What are we not resolving in terms of the races? Why does this racial tension bubble up and overflow and become so electric and so chaotic? Why is that after all these generations? And so that's what I felt like I needed to explore.
Right. I love that about fiction. It's one of the things that I think is amazing, is that we can touch on things that are difficult to talk about in just a over coffee kind of setting. You get two people who sit down who disagree on a topic, and you get them trying to have a discussion, and it can get very heated very quickly, and people dig in their heels, and they have their side that they believe in, and they can't listen anymore. But when reading a book, it's a solitary thing, and you can read it and you can kind of explore things in your own mind, and you can see how different characters do and don't do, and what and how that worked for them. And I think it kind of opens up that exploration to look at things that are uncomfortable.
I think you're right. I believe that as a reader, I'm a little less defended than I am as a person arguing a point.
Right.
And so, and I want to do that with fiction. I want to entertain, first of all. These are not preachy. None of my novels are preachy. They're sit down and go for the ride. It's going to be a suspenseful, exciting ride. But along the way, if you start questioning some things, or examining things in a different way, or seeing things from the eyes of a person that you're not, then I've done my job. And I think about, as a reader, the books that have done that in my life, and that have opened my eyes in ways that I hadn't had them open before. And that's kind of what I want to accomplish.
Right, because literature can offer you opportunities to experience things that you haven't experienced or may never be able to experience.
Exactly.
It can kind of just open you up to seeing things from a different perspective, especially a perspective you might not automatically try on.
Right.
Because the likelihood is I'm not going to try on the persona of a 16-year-old Black teenager. It would never occur to me, just because that's so far removed from me as a 60-year-old white woman. I mean, it doesn't, right? But when you read the book, you can see things from that point of view.
And this is where being a social worker has been so helpful. Because I have known Laquan, that's the 16-year-old kid.
Yes.
He's not a real person, but I have known a lot of Laquans in my practice.
Right.
And I've gotten to know them well. I'm still a white woman. I am not experiencing life the way they do, but I feel like I've developed relationships such that something has gelled in me that I feel like I start to understand. And more importantly, I want to help others kind of be open to understanding.
Right.
Again, I'm a white woman. That's still my perspective. I'm not trying to say I'm not.
But it gives you an empathy, having reached out, having been involved with communities outside of your own community. It does give you an empathy to or at least an ability to comprehend there's more than one way to see something.
Yeah, I did when I was working for the Department of Mental Health, I actually did a jail interview with a 16-year-old kid in a suicide cell. And that experience just stood with me, because it was like, wow, this kid is so vulnerable, and he's in this horrible situation. And there was so much of it that was so unfair. And that kid just stayed with me. It's been 15, 20 years. And that experience has stayed with me. And so, of course, I write about it.
Exactly. So I'm curious, because you've said that, your main character, Caleb, is a social worker, right? Is he you?
No, well, he is and he isn't. in some ways, he's got like the dream job that I would like to have.
Okay.
But he's a guy and he's very flawed, as am I. So,
Right.
but his life experiences are very different than mine.
Okay.
His upbringing is very different than mine. His relationships are very different than mine. I would say as a practitioner, we're very similar, although he pushes boundaries that I probably wasn't brave enough to push.
So, okay, so then that asks this then my next question, because I tell people all the time that I write characters who are me as I was, me as I am, or me as I wish that I had been. Right? And so is Caleb maybe you as you wish you had been in terms of like pushing those boundaries? Do you ever wish that maybe you had been braver?
Yeah, to some degree, but then also Caleb gets the consequences.
Exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, you know,
so which is, if I had done this, what might have happened?
Right. And
it really bit me in the rear, you know.
Exactly. So I love that about books. In addition to the fact that we can explore things that we might not otherwise put ourselves in, we can also look at our own lives and say, well, what would have happened if?
Exactly.
You know, like what if I had done this? Ooh, that wouldn't have worked so well.
Yeah, and so and I like to put him in. You know, he is very flawed. He has boundary issues, all kinds of things, but his heart is right.
Right.
And he's a good clinician. He sees things. He understands people at a level at a depth that a lot of practitioners, I think, don't get.
Right.
And I like that about him.
Right. When a reader picks this book up, of course, they're going to get a good story, like you said. What else do you hope they walk away with?
I hope they walk away with the sense that we have to do something about the tension. I live in the South. You live in the South, right?
Right.
When I saw what happened in 2020 with those riots, and when I saw how people were manipulating, there was a lot of focus on Black Lives Matter, you know, and Black Lives Matter did have a presence there. But there was another group, they were called the Boogaloo Boys. And the Boogaloo Boys were white supremacists. And we finally had a conviction of one of them for escalating the riots. And so you have these groups coming in and taking advantage of people that are in an angry, hurt place. Yeah. And, you know, and then just escalating things. And it's like, why does this happen? Why are people being so malicious? You know, that's part of it. And two, why don't we understand? Why don't the races understand each other better? We live in the same place. I did a talk where somebody just attacked me about this book. And I mean, not that he'd read it, but just a little bit that I said about it and how I had, you know, I was being, you know, that he was very racist in the things that he said. And it was like, I'm sitting here giving a talk and this man was just espousing all these things. And I'm like, he's exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
He was an older guy and he has these beliefs that he's had all his life that he will not have questioned. And that's not right. I mean, we have got to find a way to start understanding each other, understanding each other's lived experiences, caring about each other. You know, we're all human beings on this planet. We're in this city together. We need to, you know, this needs to be worked on. And
it needs to be worked on not when tensions are high.
No.
You know, it can't be worked on at the point that people are ready to riot. And it can't be worked on at the point where you have the groups coming in that are fanning the flames.
Correct.
Because the truth is that both sides have groups that were fanning flames that were causing people kind of caught in the middle, not to even know where to turn or what to believe, and then you start getting your own convictions about, well, this must be what's right, or that, you know, and people dig their heels in. And so it's more like, what can be done during a time of relative calm?
Exactly.
You know, and like right now there are no riots at the moment today, right? And so like, what could be done today to help so that the next time something happens that could cause that flare, that people don't flare as hard because they're now have more of an understanding.
And there's been a pressure release.
Yes.
You know, there's a release valve. I think it has to do with everybody being kind of aware of their own attitudes and their beliefs and owning their own beliefs.
Right.
And letting themselves be open to other perspectives, letting themselves be open to walking in the shoes of another. Right now, we're in a really pivotal time, with this. I don't want to get into politics, but just
Right.
this election is going to be a time when we may start hearing rhetoric that we need to challenge.
Right.
We need to challenge.
And I think that we just need to we need to recognize that because someone has an experience that's different than your own, it doesn't make their experience incorrect, nor your own incorrect. Exactly. What I've lived, and what someone else has lived, they have lived. And to be able to just acknowledge that that is their lived experience, and that it doesn't mean that either one of you is wrong.
Right.
Or right. That it is just it. This is what I feel, experienced, lived, understand about my world, and this is what you. And then how can we maybe try to understand that a little more? I just think that being open, being able to just take a deep breath and say, okay, well, that's different than what I know.
And I try to do that, in my conversations with people.
Yeah.
You hear people say, like a political issue will come up, and loan forgiveness, for example.
Yeah.
And I took on some friends who had very strong feelings about it, and it's like, I paid for my school, and I'm like, well, one, your doctor father paid for your education, and two, let me tell you about a social work student that I know who's a single mom of 3 children and is working full time while she's putting herself through school, and is potentially coming out of school with enough debt that she can never repay, and she's going to be an incredible social worker. So how is that fair?
Yeah.
So it's like her experience to your experience.
Right. And then instead of fighting over those things, what's something that can be done to help and maybe fix the problem for later? Like, right. we have a problem now, and part of the problem is that education's too expensive. And it's way outpaced the cost of other things in our life.
Right.
And to come out with a 4-year education is, most people can't without debt. And so what can we do about that?
Exactly.
So the conversation can go beyond, okay, so we have this huge issue. Even if we can't agree on what to do with those people that were caught in it, can we agree to do something so that no more people are caught in it?
Exactly. Let's look at the longer picture.
Yes.
Let's look at the big picture. Let's look at the future. Because debt leads to homelessness. It leads to all kinds of other social issues.
Well, and all the other social issues that go along with people who feel poor and trapped.
Right.
When you feel trapped, you do things that you wouldn't do otherwise. And,
which takes us back to Laquan.
Exactly.
That's the store owner.
Exactly.
It was absolutely the wrong thing to do, but he was in a horrible, horrible situation.
Right. Right. Like you would never condone violence. Violence is never the correct answer, ever, period. And you can also understand how he got frustrated enough that violence seemed like the right answer.
And then we look deeper and say, so how do we fix the underlying problems that made him burst?
Right. Right. So instead of just all of our attention on Laquan and the store owner, okay, that's done. There's really very little we can do about that incident because it's done.
It's done.
What can we do to make sure that we don't have Laquan 2.0?
Right.
So that's I like that. And I think your books in general are doing that.
I hope so. That's my goal. Yeah.
And if nothing else, you're making people think.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful. So I'm curious, what does your writing look like? Are you an everyday writer? Are you a plotter or a pantser? Do you have a specific place in your office? do you have to burn sage and have a certain kind of tea? Like, what is it like for you?
I should probably burn sage. Get some of those demons out.
Yeah.
No. So I tend to write just about every day.
Mm-hmm.
What I find to be, first of all, I want to say writing is not just sitting at the computer.
Yeah.
Writing is also mulling and problem. Writing is a lot of problem solving, especially when you write my genre, which is mystery suspense.
Right.
There's a ton of problem solving. So if I wake up at 3 a.m, chances are I'm going to lay there and think about, okay, well, how come he did this? Or how am I going to get him caught? So writing is always in my head. There's always a little part of my brain that's working on it. I do tend to sit at the computer every day for an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I like to do the women's fiction write-ins. I do those quite often.
Yeah.
I can, now that I'm mostly retired, I have more time for this, which is wonderful. It's a real luxury to have that.
Yes.
And so I try to honor that by putting my butt in the chair and getting the work done. I tend to be more of a pantser, I would say. With mysteries, I like to have the main plot of who did it, why they did it, and all of that in my head before I start. But I let everything else kind of develop as I'm writing.
Yeah.
And that has to do with my characters, because there comes a point as characters are being developed where they become very, very real to me.
Yeah.
And once that happens, they're going to tell me where they're going.
See, and I tell people that all the time, that my characters pretty much dictate to me what's happening next. And I have friends who aren't writers who look at me like, you're crazy and probably need to be medicated.
Yeah, we all need medication, Terry. That's a well-known fact.
But they do. They become so real that you can't force them to do something that I mean, it would be like asking you to do something that goes against who you are. You wouldn't.
Exactly. I even wrote a short story about a woman who's writing a novel. And she's at the computer, and the character is over her shoulder saying, "Oh, I would never say that."
Yeah. Oh.
And then they get into an argument, and you know who's going to win that argument.
Oh yeah. Oh well. So and I've had characters where I honestly feel like I can see them lined up against the wall, all with their arms folded, like, we're not doing this. So when you're done playing your game, you let us know, and we'll tell you how the story's going to go from here.
Yeah, you're never going to win that argument. Don't even go there.
No, and they just refuse to participate, and it's like, fine.
But sometimes as a writer, when a character does that to a large degree, sometimes they actually write that you have to kind of remove them. I've had that happen. Yeah, and just kind of park them somewhere else because I'm going to use them elsewhere.
Right.
But you've gone in a direction that is no longer relevant to my story. And while I love you, you're going to have to go over here for a while.
Yeah, because maybe I'll write another story about you some other time. But right now I'm writing this way. Yeah, I had a character that completely took over a story of mine, completely took it over. I thought I was writing one story, and the next thing you know, I wasn't. And I thought, well, because I didn't have any real idea of where I wanted to go anyway, I just kind of went with the new character. It was like, well, if you want to be that big and bold, let's see where you take me.
Yeah, you might as well.
Yeah.
So speaking of how characters do that, so Caleb, I'd written 3 Caleb books. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't written one in a really long time. And then suddenly I had a dream, and it was a scene.
Yeah.
And it became the second scene in this novel. And it was Caleb and Sam at a doctor's appointment. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, you're not done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there we go. The 4th Caleb came out from that dream.
So talking about that, do you have an idea for a 5th Caleb?
Not yet.
Okay.
But apparently I don't have a lot of control over when Caleb's going to come back.
Exactly. So you're not saying that you're done. You just don't know when number 5 may or may not come.
So right now, I also wrote the Orchid Tattoo, which is a different character who's a social worker. And right now I'm working on the sequel to the Orchid Tattoo called The Weird Girl. So, yeah.
Okay. And
I hadn't really envisioned that being a series, but those characters didn't go away. And so I'm like, okay, well, maybe I need to explore what happens next.
So this was the human trafficking.
Correct.
Right? Okay. Yeah. So I was going to ask what's next. So that's what's next is you're working on you said it's called The Weird Girl?
The Weird Girl.
And when do you hope to have it out?
I hope to have it. Well, I'm still drafting, so I'm a ways away. I haven't even written the publisher yet to let them know I'm working on it. So I should do that.
Maybe before this goes live, right?
I'll probably, I hope to have a draft done by Christmas.
Okay.
And then send it, and then I'll go ahead and start looking at my beta readers and get some feedback.
Right.
And so
Right.
Probably start querying in March or April.
So do you enjoy writing suspense, mystery, and that's what you're going to stick to? Or do you see yourself ever writing beyond that genre?
So I've also written a women's fiction novel called The Stone Necklace that came out in 2016, and it won the Star Award, WFWA
Right.
Star Award.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's totally women's fiction. There's no mystery to it at all. It's about grief and recovery and addiction.
Okay.
I could absolutely do another women's fiction.
Okay.
And I like doing different things. That book challenged me more than any book has ever, because I had 5 POV characters.
Yes.
With their own story arc. It was kind of braided stories is what I call it. So I definitely like to challenge myself. So and that's probably not smart, but.
No, but I tell people all the time that I'm probably committing author suicide, because I've written historical fiction, which is what everyone now seems to know me for. But currently I am writing a contemporary humor manuscript that it was in my head and it won't go away. And so it needs to be written. And I've just finished a children's picture book, and I'm having the illustrations done on that right now. And I've written a book about things that I learned while going across the United States on a tandem bicycle, which has nothing to do with any of the other things. And so, like you, I like to try things that are different. It's like, what's in my head right now? Well, it needs to come out. Let's write a story about it. So.
Exactly. And, we need to be stimulated as writers. If I just wrote Caleb books, I would be bored.
Yeah.
Although I do love the long form of series, because I love to imagine, from where he is to where he's going to be as a character.
Right.
That's kind of fascinating to me. But I also have all kinds of other things that I'm interested in that I want to explore. And so I don't see any reason to limit ourselves. I really don't. Some people feel like they have a brand, they need to stick with one thing. And I'm like, not so much.
Yeah, my brand is, I tell people that I write character-driven fiction. If you like a good character, you'll like what I write. And I just leave it at that. And that character dictates where we are.
Right.
Are we in the future? Are we in the past? Are we in the present? Are we talking to children? I guess it just depends on, I don't know. Like, that's the character. The character decides. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I love meeting someone who feels that way about things, because sometimes I do get that feeling like, well, you made a niche for yourself, and I niched accidentally.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I don't even know. My first book, Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, to me is more of a women's fiction than a historical fiction, because it's in the 1970s. But unfortunately, 1970s is considered historical fiction. It's very difficult for me.
We have lived history.
Yes, I know. It's a little difficult for me. It's like, oh my gosh, it puts me as well historical. But anyway, I didn't intend to write a historical fiction. And my World War II story, even though it's World War II, is really more about family.
Right. And that's universal.
Right. And then Daughters of Green Mountain Gap is 1890s North Carolina mountains, but it's more about like accepting change and understanding, like what happens when something big comes in and changes the world as you know it.
Exactly.
Modern medicine versus using herbs and roots, that kind of thing. And so I don't feel like I'm really a true historical fiction author. The 3 that I have just happened to fit into a setting that made that happen. So, yeah, I understand. So
there's no reason to be in a box.
Yeah, I don't like boxes. I'm not a good box person. So in addition to the fact that you have this other novel that you're now working on, do you have anything else in your mind? Anything that you've kind of put on a back burner while you get this next one done?
I have a draft that is in timeout.
Yeah.
Of a woman's fiction. It's sort of women's fiction, a little bit suspense, called Bird on Limb, about a struggling artist. And I want to pull that back out and give it
Okay.
another shot. So I want to finish, when I finish this draft, that one's kind of been calling.
That will be the next one that's
yeah,
out.
Yeah.
So now I'm curious about this. You have titles. I never have a title. I turn my book into my editor and it's still untitled, and it just kills me because I can't pick titles. How do you do that? You just know. You said, "Oh, bird on the limb." Oh, you just know.
Well, I mean, that's the title now.
Yeah. So do they change?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of times the publisher will say nope.
Yeah.
Or the agent will say nope. So yeah, Orchid Tattoo had about 130 titles.
Okay.
About 130.
That makes me feel a little better. Okay.
Sunflowers Beneath I should say working title is the
Okay. Okay. So Sunflowers Beneath the Snow went to my editor as the character name, the first character you meet. His name is Alexandro, and I saved it as that just so that I could find it on my computer. And it is the worst title in the world because you can't pronounce it, you can't spell it, you can't remember it. I knew it wasn't a real title. And then we went round and round and round and round. And I thought the book would eventually come out as Untitled, You Name It, by Terry M. Brown. Like, that's the way I feel generally about it. Yeah. It's like,
fill in blank.
Fill in blank. You name it. It's up to you. I don't know.
Titles are hard. Titles are not easy.
How do you distill 80,000 words down into a title? It just kills me. I'm no good at it.
Right. And then sometimes when the right one comes, you go, oh, wow, that's it. But that took.
Yes, it didn't just happen.
Just all kinds of drafts and, for you to distill it down. Now, Justice Be Done was easy. I actually had a different name, but a friend suggested this name because it's a quote from Clementa Pinckney.
Yes.
Who was the senator that was assassinated at the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston. And his legacy is a big part of this book. And Justice Be Done is a real recurring theme, I think.
Right.
So that kind of worked really well, but it took a long time to get there.
Okay. Well, that makes me feel slightly better that you don't just have these amazing titles that pop up out of nowhere.
Oh, good Lord. I wish.
That's the way I feel. That's the way I feel. So guys, if you want to continue this wonderful book conversation, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. As a member of this book community, you will have the opportunity to win a digital copy of Carla's book, Justice Be Done. So the links are in the show notes. So head to those. That's the book. And you definitely want to read this book. I found it, first of all, an easy read. A quick read. Like I sat down, I couldn't put it down. I had to keep reading. It does make you think, which is wonderful. It definitely opens your eyes to problems that we have going on in the world, but not in a way that makes you not want to read it. It doesn't feel like you're reading, a newspaper article. I mean, like it's a good, strong, wonderful book that just brings life, contemporary life as we're living it, right to your doorstep. So I really loved that. Carla, if someone wanted to get up with you, talk to you about the books that you're writing, give you, I don't know, title suggestions, how do they reach up? How do they reach out to you?
Especially that.
Yeah, especially that. Yeah.
So I'm at carladamron.com.
Super.
And I'm very active on social media. So Carla Damron on Facebook, Carla Damron Writes on Twitter. Okay. I'm on TikTok. Just reach out. I love talking to readers. I have just incredible conversations with readers.
Well, fantastic. And I'll have all of that in the show notes as well. So you can just reach right on out to Carla. Carla, I want to thank you so much for being with me today.
It's been a great conversation, Terry.
Thank you.
And I'm really grateful that you had me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.